Hello, and welcome to the Virginia Film Festival sponsorship of The Way I See It. I'm Bill Antholis, Director and CEO of the University of Virginia's Miller Center. And as you probably know, we're a center dedicated to the study of the American presidency, public policy, and political history. And we're delighted to partner with the festival again this year to present this insightful documentary, which offers really a front row perspective on the daily life in and around the White House. Today's feature film is the work of Chief White House photographer Pete Souza, who served under both Presidents Ronald Reagan and Barack Obama. Through his work as a photojournalist, Souza has been a close observer of the inner workings of the Oval Office in both a Republican and a Democratic administration, giving us an unparalleled view on the American presidency. And we're lucky to say that Pete is no stranger to the Miller Center, having presented his first book, Obama, An Intimate Portrait at UVA in 2017. In the film, director Don Porter weaves together images from Souza's 2017 book with video footage to share Souza's reflections on the state of the American presidency, including his commentary on the current president that have gained a strong following on social media during this most unusual election year. Today's program is moderated by another veteran of the Obama presidency, who also got to see the president up close and personal, Miller Center practitioner fellow Chris Liu, who served in the Obama administration as Deputy Secretary of Labor, and before that as the White House Cabinet Secretary and Assistant to the President in the period from 2009 to 2013. During this unusual and unsettled time in our nation's history, we are delighted both Pete and Chris can join us to discuss Obama's historic presidency, the inner workings of the White House, and the human side of the office. And we're really delighted they'll share their thoughts on the present moment. So without further ado, thank you all for being here, and let's get started.
Well, let's get started. Pete, my old friend, it's a great honor to be here with you and share this conversation. I want to thank the Miller Center and the Virginia Film Festival for convening us and giving us a chance to catch up. I want to say I love this documentary so much, and we've seen your photos, or at least I've seen many of your photos, but this was really a chance to learn about you and your family and your upbringing. And I think that's a part that a lot of people don't know about. Talk about how you came into photography.
Yeah, I had gone to Boston University, undergraduate, and I wanted to become a sports writer. In my junior year, I took a photography class, and that was it. The bug hit like instantly. It was like somehow, some way, this is what I want to do. You know, and it took me probably a good 5 years before I got any good. I ended up graduating from BU, worked for my uncle's business for a year, went to grad school in Kansas, and then really started my career at a couple small daily newspapers in Kansas.
You know, I take it this was maybe not the most popular decision in your family when you decided to pursue this line of work.
Well, I don't want to give away the whole film, but my mom has a hilarious line in the film, which speaks exactly to that.
Yeah, I know this is a challenge because as I said, I love this documentary so much, and I just want to ask you about all kinds of parts in it, but we also want to encourage people to see it. So I was fortunate to first meet you when you were covering then Senator Obama. You were doing a sort of look at his first year for the Chicago Tribune. What were your first impressions of him? And did you have a sense back then, I guess this would be 2005, of what he would become?
Yeah, I mean, I think that even right away, once I met him and hung out with him a little bit, I was like, okay, this is like one in a generation kind of politician. You could see that right away. Now, that doesn't mean a person like that ends up becoming president. But when I was photographing him as senator, that was in the back of my mind, you know, because like, I'm thinking, okay, if this guy ever does become president, then these pictures of him that I'm taking now in the Senate are not only valuable for the newspaper the next day, but could be valuable just historically. And I don't know if you remember that first office he was in
I
in
remember
the
it
Senate
well.
Dirksen building. He got like the worst office, no windows. I can't remember how long he was in that office, but I think it was a few months. And I remember making a picture in that office, and I was like, man, if he ever makes it to the presidency, this is going to be such a great contrast with a picture of him sitting at the Resolute desk. I was literally thinking that as I made pictures in that room. Now, I wouldn't be telling this story if, things hadn't turned out the way they did, but that was definitely going through my thought process.
We used to joke about that office. It was kind of halfway between the cafeteria and the dumpster. So depending on which way the wind was blowing, you'd get a different smell. But that experience with Senator Obama, and we should go backwards a little bit, was not your first experience with a once-in-a-generation politician. You were also a photographer for Ronald Reagan. And what I was struck by the documentary is just kind of the behind the scenes of you with the Reagans. Talk about what that experience was like.
Well, I had no prior relationship with Reagan. I had never met him. And in the middle of his first term, I got a call from the White House photo editor, somebody that I knew professionally, saying that Michael Evans, who is Reagan's chief White House photographer, was looking for somebody to work, underneath him, beside him. And she thought of me and asked me to apply for the job. And, I'm like kind of just starting my career. I mean, I'm probably 4 years into my career. And, suddenly this opportunity presents itself. I was not a fan of Reagan's. And, but I thought, how could I at least not interview for the job, and it was just, I ended up getting the job. It was somewhat overwhelming the first 6 months. Suddenly I'm walking into the Oval Office and, there's the president right there, 5 feet away from me. And, just there was an aura to it, and I tried to, even though the access to Reagan wasn't nearly as good as it was with President Obama, I still tried to do whatever I could to make revealing and authentic behind the scenes moments. And there are some images that I'm proud of that I made during that administration. And some of them are in the film.
What was that experience like? I mean, coming partway into an administration and photographing somebody who you didn't have a previous relationship with, contrasting that with Obama, where you had been there, for a long time before he became president.
Well, I mean, it was I was the new guy, so there's always, I wouldn't say suspicions, but like, who is this guy? And suddenly he's, in these private meetings, and I'm overwhelmed. And I think for Reagan himself, a lot of people make reference to him being a former Hollywood actor, but it was more that for the 2.5 years before I got there, though, Michael Evans, the White House photographer, had been in and out of all these meetings. So Reagan was used to, a photographer being around, and that made it easier in terms of, the presence of somebody taking pictures. I don't know if that makes sense or.
Yeah, no, and it's interesting because I think a lot about the public perceptions of both Reagan and Obama, and obviously a lot of it is in their official settings, but so much of it is them as people. And in the documentary, there's sort of this montage of film and photos from their ranch where the president and Mrs. Reagan are, posing with a chainsaw, goofing off with a chainsaw. How much of that was who Reagan actually was, and how much of that was the image that he wanted to portray?
I mean, it's probably a little of both. I mean, I think that certainly the Reagan administration was more stage managed in terms of the image, not necessarily for the White House photographer. It was a rarity that we would do kind of a setup photo like that scene that's in the ranch. But they were, you have to go back. This is in the 1980s. There was CBS, NBC, ABC. And everything that, Mike Deaver, who sort of controlled, the advance office and the press office, everything was geared to putting Reagan in a situation where he would look good on those three networks. Leslie Stahl even did a piece about this. And I remember at the time that Leslie Stahl thought she was doing a critical piece, saying how this is so stage managed, this presidency. And the White House was gleeful about her report because it showed Reagan exactly in the way they wanted him to be shown. So it just was a different time.
And it's an interesting contrast because obviously you and I both know Barack Obama well. And, when I think about him in private moments versus him in public moments, he's the same person. And so, again, that's not to say there wasn't a stage managing of, the image we portray. But, I think about some of these iconic photos that are in the documentary of him just playing in the snow during Snowmageddon with Malia and Sasha. And that was just a very genuine moment as a father with his daughters. That wasn't intended for sort of public consumption. Obviously, the photos did go out, and it creates a warmer image of him. But that's really who he was.
Absolutely, and I think to a certain extent, at least the images that are in the film that I made of President Reagan, that's who he was. The candid, fleeting moments that are shown in the film, you can't fake that stuff.
Yeah.
And what's interesting, well, I'll stop there because I'm sure we'll get to this later.
Well, and yeah, I know exactly where you're going to go. Let me ask you though, you made the decision, and again, you can correct me whether the Bush 43 did this. You created this White House Flickr page, I guess, where we put out a ton of photos.
Not my idea.
Oh, okay. Well, so how did that come about, and what was the theory behind that? And do you think that was on balance a good thing?
I do think it was a good thing. I was actually the holdout. What happened was there's a history in the photography office that my understanding is it dates back to the Nixon administration, where the White House photography office hangs on the ground floor of the West Wing, leading up to the press office on the first floor. These jumbo, they call them jumbos. You're familiar with the term. People here might not be. These are large prints, 30 by 20 prints. And we, change them out every couple weeks. And it gave people that worked for the president, but didn't necessarily interact with him every day, an idea to see what he was up to. And as you know, the staff and the Secret Service could give their friends and families tours of the West Wing at night, get to see the Oval Office, the cabinet room, but they get to see all these pictures hanging in the West Wing. And my approach to it was, I'm going to hang the real stuff. I'm not going to do the formal pictures of them standing at a state dinner, posing with the head of state. I'm going to do the behind the scenes pictures. And I think, you can speak to this, the staff was kind of blown away by just, what they were, the revealing pictures of what was really going on behind the scenes. And so that led to Macon Phillips and Josh Ernest and Robert Gibbs, coming to me saying, we need to get these online. The public needs to see these pictures. And I kept holding out. I was trying to wrap my head around, okay, my job is to document for history. What's this going to mean if we start making these pictures public, more or less in real time? I was concerned about it, how that would play out. And, I didn't cover the campaign. Those guys all did. And it was a transparent campaign. And so, that's the word they use. We want transparency. We want people to see these pictures. And I finally went along with it. Matter of fact, the first series of images we posted wasn't until after the first 100 days. I think it was in May of 2009, mostly because I kept they didn't convince me. And what led me to saying okay was that, like the jumbos, that I wanted to curate the images that went on Flickr. I didn't want somebody from the press office going through all the pictures saying this one, this one, this one.
Right.
They got to see the pictures before, we posted them. They could object if there was something they didn't want out there. But the photo office controlled which images got, made public on Flickr. Because I thought that, we're the professionals. I had, as my photo editor, Alice Capriner, who had been the director of photography at Time magazine, many years experience. And so I wanted that sort of, photojournalistic look at what was happening behind the scenes.
Look, I'm glad you agreed to do that, because I think for those of us that were privileged to work in the White House, we could see these photos every day, and it was sort of fun to see when they get swapped out every week or two, the meetings that we had both been in and we knew about, as well as the ones we weren't. And there was always that kind of fun surprise when, one of us showed up in a jumbo. And I still have my favorite jumbo that you took of me and the president was from Blair House in 2000.
Yeah, I remember that.
Very ornate wallpaper and mirrors. And it was a moment that I didn't even know you had taken the photo. And it's just such a beautiful photo. Look, and I think what strikes a lot of people about these photos of President Obama is just the incredible human moments. Again, whether it's playing in the snow or, that horrible day of Sandy Hook. And, and did you ever feel like some of these moments were just too personal, too private to be there taking a photo?
Well, I mean, certainly after an incident like the mass shooting at Newtown, I mean, you know as well as anyone that we had to do that too many times. We had too many mass shootings. We had a lot of natural disasters, hurricanes, tornadoes, mudslide in the state of Washington, where he would go after a certain period of time and go and meet families that had lost a loved one or had been affected by mass shooting or natural disaster. And, those really were the hardest moments to photograph. Now, I will tell people that there's an advance team that goes to any event the President of the United States does. And, sometimes a week before, sometimes just a few days before. And they kind of coordinate the visit. They would let people know that a White House photographer is going to be in the room. If you really don't want, we will not release any of these pictures publicly. We will send you copies. If you still do not want pictures taken, let us know, and then they would tell me. And I think that only happened 2 or 3 times. I remember there was one time when we went to, I'm trying to think if I can remember the name of the town, it was at Osso, Washington. There was a big mudslide. Yeah. And all the families that had lost a loved one were gathered inside this little church. And there was one family, at least one family, that said they didn't want me taking pictures, and the advance team told me who they were. But before President Obama got to that family, they saw how I worked, which was, I wasn't being a nuisance. I was being selective the way I was taking pictures. I didn't, I was obviously aware of their situation. And I remember that family, while I was there, went to the advance office and said, we changed our mind. We're okay if the White House photographer makes pictures when the president greets us. So I felt like that I was doing my job in an appropriate way.
How about moments with the Obama family? Again, going back to that horrible day of Newtown, there's a photo of the president hugging Malia. I think when she gets home from school. I think about that one, or I think about that kind of iconic one from inauguration night 2009, when you guys are all in the elevator together, and I think the president has given his jacket to Mrs. Obama, and they're kind of like next to each other, and the staff are all kind of awkwardly looking away, and yet you're taking the photo.
Yeah, it's sort of like, I guess the elevator picture is one where it's kind of like this private moment, but it's really not, you know, because when you become the president, there's so many people around you,
yeah,
that it becomes a semi-private moment, not a private moment. The one with Malia, this was the afternoon of the Newtown shootings. If you remember, that was during the Christmas season, and he was supposed to make an appearance at a Christmas party on the state floor late that afternoon. And what he would usually do is go up to the residence, pick up, quote unquote, pick up Michelle, and then they'd walk down the cross hall to the state floor. So I went up in the elevator with him to the private residence, and we got off the elevator, and Malia had just gotten home from school, and he just, you know, wrapped his arms around her and he wouldn't let her go. And in that moment, he was a dad. And my guess is that there were a lot of dads and moms that day, that night, doing the exact same thing to their kids, you know, having, you know, a situation where in Newtown, 20 families just had lost a first grader and shot and killed. You know, that picture was never, we never made that picture public. But when I did my book in 2017, I asked President Obama if I could include it, because I thought it really, in the Newtown section, I thought it really gave, you know, a real personal look at, you know, he was just a dad in that moment. And I thought it was important to include in my book.
So many of the photos that you've taken are just iconic right now. I think about the famous one in the Situation Room during the Bin Laden raid. And what's amazing about that photo is, and we'll do the contrast shortly with the current president, that clearly is not a staged photo. I mean, you see the expression on Secretary Clinton's face where she's almost like covering her mouth, and you see everyone crowded together. They're clearly not posed in any way. What are your recollections of that moment? And I do want to ask you one thing. I remember you once told me you had never altered any photos from anyone except for that one. And I think it's because of the piece of paper that's on in front of Secretary Clinton you blurred out.
Yeah, it's really funny. I mean, so we were in that room for 40 minutes as they monitored the raid as it happened. This is this little tiny conference room within the Situation Room complex, not the usual room
Not
that
even
he
the
was
biggest
in.
one there, yeah.
And they had the communications link set up in that little tiny room. I think because they didn't realize the president wanted to be there, you know, during the raid, and they were afraid to switch the link, is my recollection, to the big room because they thought they might lose it. They might lose the connection. So that's why everybody's in that tiny little room. Now I sort of lost my train of thought, but it was, the only word I can describe those 40 minutes was tense. It was tense. You know, you spoke about Hillary Clinton. There was some controversy, a faux controversy, as I say, where, you know, because she had her hand over her mouth, and she was having to explain why she had her hand over her mouth, like when the photo was released the next day. And she said in one interview, I didn't even realize that Pete was in the room. And I was sort of like, that's how tense it was, that I was in that room making pictures, and nobody was like paying attention to me. And I think that that moment is as true a moment as you can find in a situation like that. I mean, I made probably I made 1,000 pictures that day, but while they were in that tiny conference room, I made, I think, just over 100, which may sound like a lot to people, but it's really not. I mean, it's not a lot of photos. So it'll be interesting in years to come when all the pictures are released, whether people think I chose the right one. Now I remember what I was going to say. While I was in there photographing, I saw that document on the table, and I knew it was classified. You know, I've learned to know what a classified document looks like, and I was like, should I take it off the table? And then I thought, no, I shouldn't. Like, that's messing with history. So I didn't take the document off the table. And then when we, the next day, decided to make the picture public, it became a problem because it was classified. And I talked to John Brennan, the Homeland Security Advisor, and Mike Morrell, the Deputy CIA Director, about whether we could make the picture public if we blurred that document. And they thought that would be okay. So that's what we did. The one and only time.
And you tell this story in the documentary. Again, this was clearly not a staged photo, because you see that President Obama is not sort of in the main chair. There was an Air Force general who I guess was, directing the communications, who offered to give up his seat to the president. And the president said, no, you sit there. And that's why you see the president sort of off to the side, almost, at like a staff chair sitting there.
Yeah, I mean, he was just one of the observers like everybody else. There was only one guy in that room that was involved in any aspect of the raid, and that was Brad Webb, the Brigadier General that you mentioned, because he was on a laptop and communicating with, I'm not sure if I think it was Bill McRaven, who was in Afghanistan, but he might have also been connected to Leon Panetta, who was at CIA headquarters.
So that, again, we've talked a lot about the, jumbo versions of your photos that are in the White House and are constantly rotated through. That one was never rotated. That one always sort of sat there by the entrance to the Situation Room. The other one that never rotated was that really famous one of the little boy touching President Obama's hair, the little African-American boy who's the son of I guess a departing White House staffer. And I talk about that photo and why you think that photo not just resonated with so many of us who work there, but with everyone who's seen that. And again, for people that haven't seen it, President Obama is sort of like bending forward and a little boy is reaching up and touching his hair.
Yeah, this is a kid who said to President Obama, he had visited him in the Oval Office with his family and said that his friends had told him that his haircut was just like his. So, President bends over and says, go ahead and touch it. Kid touches his head. I got one frame. It just happened so fast. I got one picture. And I mean, I think, imagine being a young person of color, young African-American kid, seeing that picture, because here's this kid, African-American kid, touching the head of the President of the United States. That looks like him. But I think it also said something about Barack Obama, that, he'd go ahead and bend over like that at the behest of, a 6-year-old kid. People knew the story, so it was really interesting when the staff, I mentioned staff and Secret Service, would give friends and families tours of the West Wing at night, and they'd always stop in front of that picture and tell the story. And it for a while there, like maybe a year or two, it hung right outside the press office. Mm-hmm. And so a reporter, Jackie Combs for the New York Times, noticed that all the other pictures were changing and that one wasn't. And she did a story about that. And that sort of took on a whole new life. She interviewed the family and it got, sort of more attention. And then I think it was in late 2015, I was like, okay, this picture's been up for almost 7 years. That's enough. So I took it down. and put another one up. The next day, I had 5 members of the senior staff, independently of one another, come into my office and say, "Can you please put that picture back up?" You know.
Love that photo. And what I love about it is we used to always joke that if you wanted to take a good photo with the president, bring the kid in, because he had this wonderful way with children. And you highlight a couple of them. One was the son of Nancy Ann DeParle, who really was the architect of healthcare reform, and how the president spent time with Nancy Ann's son, or the famous one where the president's pretending to be Spider-Man. Nate Cameron's little boy. And those are just wonderful moments of him, playing around with children.
Yeah, I mean, you can, I when Sasha and Malia came to the White House, they were 7 and 10, so they had gotten a little bit older. But you could sort of see him, what he must have been like as a dad when they were really young. And he is going to have so much fun, as a granddad, whenever that happens. Probably won't happen for a while, but he just loves little kids. I mean, he started calling himself the baby whisperer, that he could quiet any crying child.
So let's obviously move now past January 20th of 2017. Leaving aside the politics of his current president, you and I are not fans, but it does strike me, we don't see these kind of behind the scenes photos of Donald Trump. And it does seem to me that's a missed opportunity to humanize him a bit. I can't remember a single photo where I've seen him just being casual, playing around with his son, doing anything other than, these kind of weirdly staged photos that they do with his thumbs up. I mean, leaving aside the politics, do you think that's a missed opportunity?
I mean, one thing we don't know is if those pictures exist. Like, I don't have any inside knowledge as to whether those pictures are or not being made. They're not being made public. We know that. But I don't know whether the White House photographer has that kind of access. I just don't know. And it's I think it's entirely up to the communications and press office to make the determination on whether, if those pictures are released, should they be shown. Where it's a missed opportunity is if they're not being made, it's a missed opportunity for history, for sure. I sort of like to use it as an example. Every head of state phone call that Barack Obama made, I made pictures of. Doesn't sound very exciting. It's a guy on a phone. But in each situation, photographs can help show who's in the room, where's the phone call being made, what's the mood in the room. You can sometimes tell that. Well, I mean, Donald Trump got impeached for essentially one phone call to the president of Ukraine. We've never seen a picture of that call. Why is that? Where was it made? Who was in the room? What was the mood? So I think historically it's sad if that is in fact the case, that these pictures are not being made.
And that's an interesting segue to the new role you have taken on. And you talk about in the documentary that you didn't even know what the phrase throwing shade meant. When did you decide that you were going to sort of turn from being just an observer to a participant and a resistor? And was that hard, sort of, finding your own voice, coming to your, and deciding that you wanted to speak out?
Well, I mean, if you on January 20th, I started my personal Instagram account, January 20th, 2017. On January 21st, 2017, I posted my first shade post. So I guess it kind of happened right away. Now, all admit that initially, for the first, I don't know, year, it was, I was kind of subtle and I was kind of humorous, and I wouldn't necessarily directly point out what I was shading. You had to do some work. You had to be paying attention to the news. But then, it just kind of got to be where I felt I had to like ratchet it up a bit. And that's when I started getting the hate mail.
I'm curious, and the process by which you do this, because I mean, how many photos did you take of the Obama White House?
1.9 million.
So, Donald Trump says or does something on a day-to-day basis. You sort of instantly in your mind sort of say, okay, here's the contrast that I want to draw. How and what is your memory of those, 1.9 million photos and your ability to access them?
Like my memory is limited mostly to the pictures that we had made public. Either on Flickr or whitehouse.gov, or there were many instances where, NBC or, some newspaper was doing a certain story and we'd release a photo, to them. All those photos I have very good memory of, because before any photo was made public, I made sure that I personally signed off on it. So those pictures are all embedded in my head for the most part. Every once in a while, I like forget about an image that I had. So, usually, when RBG died, it was, I remembered instantly the picture of him and her leaving the Oval Office after a private meeting, and then interacting with her on the House floor before State of the Union speech. So it's kind of easy for me to recall those images.
Have you ever decided, in drawing that contrast, this is, I guess, the world we live in social media. Wow, I think I maybe went a little too far on this one.
Oh yeah, it's happened several times.
I don't know, there are moments my wife looks at my Twitter feed and says, wow, I can't believe you just said that, actually. Does your wife ever say it to you?
Oh yeah. I get worse on Twitter. I don't do that much on Twitter, but I banned myself from Twitter for 30 days because I had gone a little too far. So I actually shut my account down because I was like, okay, this is not healthy for me to. I'll stick to Instagram.
Yes, I know it does. You sort of go into a very dark place sometimes in Twitter, and you just need to get out of there. I want to just take a step back. I mean, and you talk about this in the documentary, sort of as a contrast to Donald Trump. Just kind of, you didn't necessarily agree with President Reagan's policies, but you respected the way that he upheld the office, the way that he conducted himself, and obviously the same with, President Obama. Why? How do we explain that to the American people? Like, look, this is not just about policies. This is something bigger. I mean, I don't know about you, but when I saw the Republican convention and the campaign big signs on the south lawn of the White House, I mean, that's not the White House you and I worked in. I mean, this was the people's house. I mean, this should be something more than, an individual president and about his policies.
I would urge people to read Bill McRaven's op-ed, and I think it was Washington Post a couple years ago, where he really cut to what the problem, which is that there is no ethical, moral, or legal boundaries for this administration. They've crossed them all. And everything that this guy does is about him, like what's going to help him. And that's not the job of the presidency. The job of the presidency is to help us, not him. And, you know, this is a guy that has not an ounce of empathy in his being. You know, he is the guy who gives himself an A+ for how he's responded to coronavirus. Okay, wait, 201,000 people have died. That's, you know, the equivalent of 66 9/11s. And he's telling people that he deserves an A+ for the way he's responded. I mean, one of the things that I don't quite understand is he clearly, you know, lies about everything, and why that just doesn't sink in with his supporters. I guess because he does it with such bravado and repeats these lies so many times that people start to think that they're true.
Yeah. I want to take a step back and just sort of talk about what the life of a White House photographer is like. I mean, it was a 24/7 experience for you, not just during the 8 years, but obviously before that in the campaign. There were obviously some perks. We get to see you getting married in the White House. Was there something, again, you probably had so many once in a lifetime moments in the White House or meeting people. Was there a couple moments where you're like, above everything else you remember, or a person that you met who was an idol of yours or who you were speechless in front of?
You mean like Springsteen or Julia Roberts probably? You know, I've been such a huge fan of Bruce Springsteen since 1978. And, you know, it's just kind of tongue-tied meeting him for the first time. Now, I'll say that most of these, my role was not a participant, you know, unlike your role. You were a participant in these meetings and these interactions with the president, and that was not my role. My role was to be the observer. But you know, obviously, in a lot of, you know, more personal situations, I would occasionally have a chance to, you know, meet some of these folks. I remember when Julia Roberts came to the Oval Office one time. She came up to me and she goes, "Hi, I'm Julia." I'm like, I know who you are. So that was pretty funny.
How about world leaders? You know, Pope, Mandela, people like that.
You know, he never saw Mandela when he was president. He only saw Mandela when he was senator, and I was not there for that. David Katz has a great picture of that encounter. Yeah, I mean, I actually got to meet Pope Francis. Was not anything that I engineered. It was the Vatican photographer who, like, you know, just like unbeknownst to me, you know, had set up this quick greet with the Pope. I remember all I said to him was, "My mother really appreciates what you're doing," you know, because she's a good Catholic woman. And I think probably my favorite world leader was, well, I mean, several of them knew who I was, knew a little bit about me, and knew my name. I mean, Merkel and Cameron of UK and Renzi of Italy. So they would, you know, usually come over and say hi to me. Trudeau of Canada. But I think Merkel to me was my favorite because she didn't necessarily like photographers being there all the time. You know, her photographers were often complaining to me about their access, but she was like, I don't know what words I can use, so I'll just use initials. She was no BS. You know? It was like, she was straight. If she disagreed with President Obama, she'd say it, you know. And I think their relationship because she was there all 8 years, and Germany was chancellor all 8 years while he was president. I think that was probably the closest relationship that he had to another head of state. And so I'd put her at the top.
I do love those photos of President Obama with world leaders. I think it was it one of the final G7s that was at Camp David, where they're like watching a World Cup soccer match, and you can sort of tell like they're taking a break from whatever formal thing they're doing, and they're just watching soccer.
Yeah, it was I don't think it was World Cup. I think it was like European Championship between UK and Germany. So, Cameron and Merkel were especially animated.
Well, look, you've been so generous with your time. Let me just wrap up with a, kind of a broader question. The photography profession has completely changed during the time that you've been doing it, whether it's with digital photos, whether it's the internet. Do you have any advice for a young person who's maybe watching us now or watching the documentary and thinking of pursuing your profession?
Yeah, I mean, I think more than ever, it's important to, make authentic pictures, and to faithfully represent what's happening in front of your camera before you put it out there. I think it's too easy to post photos that are out of context, and especially in these days where you have, the president of the United States calling the media, fake news and the enemy of the people. Let's not do anything to feed into that by, misrepresenting what you're photographing. I also think that more and more we're going to see, citizen journalists be an important role in society. They already have. I mean, there's really the reason we've had this resurgence of Black Lives Matter protests is because of a 17-year-old girl who really had the courage to video, not some video where you couldn't necessarily tell what was going on. She stood her ground for 8 minutes and photographed George Floyd. She didn't obviously know that it was going to lead to his death, but she saw wrong and she held her ground. And that alone, led to so much, led to a movement. And, one of the reasons why the Breonna Taylor until recently didn't get a lot of attention is because, obviously there was no visual of what had happened to her, but you can just imagine that horrific scene. So I think citizen journalists are, will play an important role for our society.
That's a wonderful way to wrap up this conversation. Pete, I want to thank you for being so generous with your time today on behalf of the Miller Center and the Virginia Film Festival. I think you've certainly given all of the viewers much to think about, not only about the work you've done, but I think in closing about the role of citizen journalists. So I think we've now piqued everyone's interest in seeing the documentary. Where can we see it?
Yeah, it's in theaters now. Obviously, only go if it's at a theater in your town and it's safe to do so. But it will premiere commercial free on MSNBC October 16th. It's a Friday night at 10 p.m. Eastern time, right after Rachel Maddow, commercial free. And then I think maybe one more time on MSNBC, maybe that Sunday. And then a week later on the 23rd, it will be available for streaming, I believe everywhere, like iTunes, the new NBC, Peacock, and I guess many other places where you can get the film on demand.
Well, I can tell you I've seen it, and I'm looking forward to seeing it again. Pete Souza, thank you for being with us today.
Thanks, Chris. Great to see you. And I got my, if you could see, I actually voted today, absentee. So make sure you get out there and vote.
That's a perfect message. Everyone go out and vote. Thank you all for being with us.